Let's bring in Hollywood divorce attorney David Glass for more on this. David.
People going through divorces are going through some of the hardest times of their lives, and a lot of what they're going through is emotional. And in any divorce, there's a huge sense of loss, and loss of relationship, of money, some friends.
We're back with another episode of the Hourglass Podcast, where family law and psychology intersect. I'm your host, David Glass, a certified family law specialist, former psychologist, and author of Moving On, Redesigning Your Emotional, Financial, and Social Life After Divorce. We're here to help those going through a breakup or divorce find ways to make the trauma of it all a little bit easier to deal with, more understandable, smoother, and to help them find motivation and inspiration to move on. How? By continuing to share advice and insights from a variety of experts, specialists who are regarded as the best in their respective fields. Today's topic, how to end a relationship with a gaslighter. Dr. Seda Terzyan is the founder and director of Perspective Psychological Services in Newport Beach, California. In addition to her practice, Dr. Terzyan is also on the medical staffs at St. Jude Medical Center, Mission Hospital, and at Hoag. Dr. Terzyan, we've talked a lot about gaslighting lately, but what we want to explore is a gaslight victim's recovery. To start, is there any good way to break up with someone who's a gaslighter?
Sure. Well, gaslighting is really complex, and it's also very subtle in a lot of relationships. So often in a relationship, it'll grow over time. So the victim sometimes might not even realize they've been gaslit for so long until it's gone on for such a long time. And usually what happens is now the victim has developed likely some anxiety. A lot of that comes from anger that they don't know what to do with because the relationship feels a little bit threatening when you're constantly being invalidated. So what happens is that anger gets held in, usually turns into an anxiety, and the person starts to doubt themselves, doubt their decisions. And what's iffy about that and risky is that the more you doubt yourself in the relationship, what I've seen, at least with clients, is you start to doubt yourself across domains. This doubt becomes generalized to the point where, what outfit should I buy? Is this the right purchase? Yeah. It just becomes so insidious that it gets much more difficult. So in terms of what happens with a gaslighter, the recovery process can be difficult depending on the person's own history. So if someone already came into a relationship, maybe already had a bit of an anxious attachment style, they might struggle even more to get out of it. Whereas maybe someone else that recognizes it and is more clear on what their needs and values are in a relationship might be better able to navigate it. But in terms of how to essentially recover or, start to identify and get out of it, I'd say the first thing is that a person really needs to reality test. And what I mean by that is you have to have a support system. And sometimes a gaslighter will take that away from someone over time. You kind of lose your identity because you're always doubting yourself. You might lose some friends, but I can't emphasize enough the support system. And if you don't have that, get into therapy. The power of someone just looking at you and saying, that's not normal.
Right.
Or, you're totally valid in thinking it's wrong that he doesn't prioritize you, or that he says he should spend time with his friends and it shouldn't bother you. And, all these things, just to have someone normalize it, it just starts to build you back up slowly. So that's what's super important, is to at least see a therapist if you don't have the support system.
So after you see someone, whether it's a therapist or you get help from a close friend or family member, what's the next step in trying to get away from a gaslighter?
The next step, so once you're kind of getting that support, I'd say the first thing is you want to start to also create a little bit of distance from this person. Now, that doesn't mean, you're automatically breaking up with them, but at least spending a little bit more time on your own. That lets you come out of this fog a bit more slowly. But I will say, to end it with a gaslighter, you do need a swift, clean cut. The more there's this back and forth with, let's keep talking, let's go back and forth after the breakup, it gets more and more difficult because you sort of get stuck in the grasp of the gaslighting happening again.
You said you have to make a swift break. What's that process look like? What kinds of things can a person who's a victim of gaslighting say to try and make this happen? Or is it just disappearing from that person's life?
Yeah. Well, I'd say the swift break is eventually after you've done some work on yourself to decide, we're done, and to not do the back and forth too long, because then you just get pulled back in. But I think what the most important thing is to communicate with a gaslighter, the person that's become a victim. Like I said, because of all the invalidation, they've lost touch with what their needs and wants are in the relationship. And in many cases, they've stopped communicating them because it's been invalidated or told, hey, you shouldn't need that.
Right.
That's not normal. You don't need to do that. You're nagging, or whatever it is. So the person has slowly suppressed their needs and wants. So something that's important is get clear on what you need and want in the relationship, and really don't lie to yourself. Get very honest with yourself on, this is what I need. These are my values in a relationship. And then slowly starting to communicate that. If the person is a pretty serious gaslighter, what's going to happen is, as you communicate your needs more often, you're going to see the resistance again and again. And the clearer you get, the more conflict, unfortunately, might arise as you become more confident and clear. But what typically happens is the gaslighter starts to feel that they can't necessarily control you anymore. And it sort of, cuts their legs off in a way.
Right.
Because their power comes from you agreeing that maybe I am wrong, or maybe I am being crazy. I'll stop doing that. So when you're able to say, no, I really do need this. I need to be a priority, or I need you to not hang out with these certain people because these are my values. The clearer you get, it almost naturally will start to turn off a gaslighter, because they're not going to be able to control it. Because a gaslighter, really what they want is they want to have their cake and eat it too.
Right.
They want the relationship, but they also want their freedom. And they have poor boundaries. So they don't have a sense of respecting the other person's boundaries. For them, it's, hey, I just want to live my life, and you should be okay with that. Why aren't you okay with that? So some of it is conscious, some of it is less conscious. But at the end of the day, it's, I just want both. And I just want you to be okay with it, without really respecting the impact that has on that other person over time. So I'd say naturally, as you get stronger in yourself and your identity, and it takes work, I can't lie. I mean, it's really a process. It's not easy to get out of the grasps of someone that's been invalidating you, particularly because in a romantic relationship, we trust that person. So their opinion, and when they tell us we're wrong, that chips away at your self-confidence. So that's going to take you some time to build back up. But as you get there, and as you start communicating, it's going to start to happen in a way, like I said, naturally, where the person doesn't feel as much in control. And you have to continue getting that support.
Okay, so what does the process look for someone who finds a therapist or counselor and is working up to being able to break it off with someone who's no good for them?
Sure. I'd say it's tough in the beginning. And therapy is tough. I think some people think therapy is just to go, it's like a spa. It's not.
Right.
Therapy is tough. It's triggering. So when you go in, at least what I've experienced is people will come in, and sometimes they won't even, they'll be protecting the partner. And it takes me some time to identify this. There is not a lot of respect for boundaries in this relationship.
Right.
So sometimes it happens in therapy that the person becomes aware, hey, my anxiety isn't because I'm just anxious generally, like I've suddenly developed an anxiety disorder. It's coming from this relationship.
Right.
And often people unconsciously are protecting the relationship. So it takes some time to identify, what do you feel towards this partner? Is this healthy for you? And once that starts to come to light, that's where the therapist is going to validate the person, if that's appropriate, which it usually is, and say, that's really normal that you feel sad, or that's really normal that that's hurtful to you. Whereas what they've been hearing is, maybe you're nagging, or you shouldn't worry about that, or stop being insecure, rather than getting the validation and then reassurance. So as that starts to build them up, then the person starts to become more comfortable with approaching the situation and identifying, maybe I'm struggling because of my relationship. And it's not just some random anxiety that I've developed.
Right. And so if you're a victim of gaslighting, is there ever a key moment where the person should realize it's imperative that I have to get out of this relationship? Or is it just come somewhere along in the process?
Yeah, unfortunately, again, it is somewhat subtle, but I'd say the big things to watch out for, just really for your mental, physical well-being, is, like I was saying, if you suddenly start to notice that you're more anxious than usual, Some people will start having panic attacks. They seem random. With mental health, things don't have to be totally linear.
Right.
You know, you could have a panic attack that's not related to something that happened necessarily in the relationship, but the fact is your stress levels are so high that it's presenting itself in these various ways, like anxiety. You might find changes in your mood, motivation changes, like you don't really want to do anything, you don't want to pursue anything, and you're spending most of your time probably with this partner.
Yeah.
Or if you're not actually spending physical time with them because maybe they're doing other things, your mental space is highly occupied by this person, and you're not in a very positive way, just worrying about them, wondering what's going on, things like that. So those are some of the cues. And I'd say big things to watch out for are if you ask a partner for some reassurance and the answer is no, or, you know, you're crazy, you're insecure, you need to go figure that out, or it just gets right to just solving the problem, it's already a little iffy, right? Because in a romantic relationship, you want, what's healthy is to have space for these uncomfortable emotions like sadness, insecurities that prop up. And the big thing is your feelings don't need a reason. That's where gaslighting will come in and just this, you know, not acknowledge the emotion and just jump to, well, don't feel that way. That's not,
Right.
why would you feel that way?
Right.
It's normal to feel the emotion. And then you can go on to solving the problem. But if we completely invalidate the experience, the person starts to doubt themselves. So I'd say if you start to doubt yourself in a lot of ways in your life, it's a real sign to really look at your relationship.
So does the victim of gaslighting ever fully recover? Is it possible to recover from this, or is this something that's going to haunt the victim for the rest of their life?
100% they will recover. And, you know, the big thing is there's something called post-traumatic growth. And relationships like this can be traumatic and often are traumatic for the person because the stressor isn't like, you know, one event.
Right.
It's chronic. You're going through this and you're losing touch with yourself. So there is post-traumatic growth. I'd say something that the literature shows, especially with divorces and relationships, is people often, they underestimate how much stress they were in leading up to a breakup.
Right.
And they overestimate how stressful a breakup is going to be,
Right.
as well as the after effects of a divorce or breakup. People think, I can't tolerate it, I'm not going to be okay, where the studies actually show the exact opposite, where people are much more stressed, their stress levels are much higher leading up to a divorce or breakup,
Right.
and significantly lower at the breakup and divorce, and even lower still a year after a breakup.
Right.
So, you know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, especially with gaslighting. People come out of the fog quicker than they think. The more distance they have, the more support they get, they start to really see, wow, I'm feeling a lot better, like just myself as I come out of this. So that's just, there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel, but I will say it's important to do the work, right? It takes, I'd say, about a year after a breakup. That's where a lot of the healing happens. I think sometimes people rush to the next relationship, which can be okay. It just depends on your level of work that you've done on yourself and how aware you are of what's going on for you, how much support you have. Sometimes jumping into the next thing, though it can feel good, you run the risk of a lot of your triggers leaking. So you might be very triggered by something your new partner does that maybe they aren't gaslighting you, but you're hypersensitive to it,
Right.
and you're overly reactive. And then that just starts to get very confusing. It just means it's still like an open wound.
Sure.
You need to really take the time to heal that.
Yeah, so I'm going to share this show with just about all of my divorce clients who come through I tell them you should take a year off. You should get yourself into therapy, figure out what you did wrong, but also to allow yourself to heal. And I'm always telling people that if you're going to jump right into a new relationship, you're bringing the mistakes from the prior relationship into this one.
Right. And even just for your own well-being, it's just you're going to be much more triggered for about a year or two in that new relationship.
Right.
You're going to feel raw, you know, and if you're with a supportive partner, that could be a wonderful growth experience. Unfortunately, what happens is people go so quickly, they'll end up with a somewhat similar person to their ex, you know, when they jump so quickly, because they're not, you think you know the red flags, but you don't really, because you became aware of the red flags when they became very blatant, but they sneak up on you.
Yeah.
They start really small until you're attached, and then it's harder to break up.
So when this ultimate breakup comes, you mentioned how there's the gaslighter is going to try and keep you in the relationship, going to try and keep you there rather than going away. What does that sound and look like for the victim? What kinds of things should they say, and what kinds of things should they expect from this soon-to-be ex-partner?
Right. I always go back to trying to stay with I statements. I statements mean I own my part. So I would say, when you do this, I feel sad. So it's not necessarily to blame you or say, you always do this, or I'm breaking up with you because I hate everything you do with this or that. It's trying not to use extreme words and always just own your own experience. Don't really make it about them causing it, because that will make them defensive. Honestly, it'll make anyone defensive, not just someone that gaslights. So I statements like, when you go out with your friends instead of spending more time with me, I feel sad. Or when you spend a lot of time with your ex-girlfriend without telling me, I feel hurt and bothered. Now, the gaslighter will still come at you, and they'll say, you shouldn't be bothered about that. That's not even a big deal. We spend tons of time together. So they'll come at you with these statements. So what I emphasize is staying with your self, stay with your feeling. And we call it the broken record technique. It sounds kind of silly, but it's essentially just repeating what you said again. I still feel hurt. They'll go back with it still hurts me when you do this. So this is an example of a conversation that you might have. And I'd say when it comes to a breakup, what I've seen in my experience, I guess, when I've worked with couples or, people that have come in one person in a relationship, as the victim continues to do this, the gaslighter eventually just starts to lose that interest in controlling. They realize it's not that easy to control, and sometimes they kind of go away on their own. Or the breakup happens a little more naturally because it's just they're not getting what they want from it. However, if it's a more contentious breakup, you shouldn't be surprised if they say you're not going to be okay without them. You're never going to find someone that's going to be as good to you as they are. Those types of things will likely come up. So that's, again, the more aware the victim is that these are normal things they're going to hear, and be aware of a lot of your growth is going to happen after you're done. And it's very normal to feel somewhat lost, especially when you've been gaslit for who knows how long. It's normal to feel like you're going to be lost without this person, but that there is a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. So like I said, it's really using these I statements. Usually the gaslighter loses steam already, but that's really a sure way to start to come out of a relationship like that, because it's complicated.
Now, you mentioned triggers. You get into a new relationship, and you mentioned triggers from your past relationship that start showing up in this new relationship. What would that look and sound like?
Let's say your new partner is not gaslighting you. Like, they're actually a pretty secure person. They respect you. Like, maybe it's a good relationship. However, nobody's perfect. So they will do something that will not be something you like. So let's say, for example, your new partner says they're going to go on a trip with their friends. And now this brings up maybe all kinds of anxieties for you, because your previous partner would do that a lot. And maybe they'd lie to you. Maybe they wouldn't call you when they went on a trip, and it would just be a source of a lot of anxiety for you. So you bring that with you. This new partner has never done that to you, has never, gone on a trip, ignored you, lied to you. So we don't know what's going to happen with this new partner yet, but it's so scary because you maybe haven't fully healed. So you're carrying these triggers. So what might happen is that partner might say they're doing that, and it might trigger a lot of pain for you. You might get very upset with them and maybe want them to not go. Or you might get very upset with them for things that they didn't do. So it just makes you hypersensitive to the partner. That's the new partner. And unfortunately, that could cause conflict in this new relationship. However, it is also an opportunity to be vulnerable with your new partner. So my advice would be, try to be aware that you're triggered and communicate. When you said you're going on this trip, Unfortunately, it brought up some anxiety for me because it's an area of pain. Maybe I've been lied to, or I feel very insecure. And hopefully your new partner will be able to reassure you,
Right.
rather than invalidate you and say, well, that's, you shouldn't care about that, or why are you nagging me, So
Right.
that's an opportunity, again, for growth in your new relationship, to have that honest conversation rather than pretend you're fine with it and not be fine with it.
Right. And in a much simpler way, over a decade ago when I met my wife and we started dating, she came out and told me I can't stand the waiting after the date to hear, are we going to have another date? Oh. That's very upsetting to me. And so I just said, well, at the end of each date, we'll say, when's our next date? And we'll get out our calendars, we'll plan the next date. There won't be any waiting for me to call, or should I wait to call? Should I call her back right away? Now, that's not the same level as gaslighting, but I think that's a pretty...
But that's so vulnerable that she shared that with you.
Yeah.
It seems small, but that is a lot of vulnerability to just say, I just need this.
Right.
And for you to respond and say, well, here you go.
Right.
And that's very healthy. Whereas if you were a gaslighter, it would be like, well, why would you need that?
Right, right. Well, good. So I'm glad I'm not a gaslighter.
Yes, you're not.
I'm glad that at least we started and continue to communicate with my wife. But thank you so much for all the stuff you shared with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, as you know, I like to close out each episode with song lyrics. One that shares a message about how precious time is and how we all need to think about how to spend time wisely. Going through a divorce or any kind of breakup is a process, but far too many regret the amount of time they wasted on the process. With our focus on gaslighting, I want you to ask yourself how much time you've spent processing the aftermath of the abuse, fending off a gaslighter, stuck in a mental state trying to put behind the trauma inflicted on you by a gaslighter. Finally, how much time do you think you need to move beyond the effects of the mental abuse? Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting you don't need time to recover from a gaslighting experience. You absolutely do. But don't dwell on it. Continue to move on. Distract your mind with all the positives that lie ahead. So then, to get back on track, my song choice today is a rock classic by Pink Floyd, Time. The lyrics, written by the iconic group's bassist, Roger Waters, are evergreen, though it was written decades ago, in the 60s. According to one music critic, its core message is a lamentation on wasting valuable time that you someday will wish you had back. I've highlighted a couple of key phrases that I think nail that concept. Waiting for someone or something to show you the way. And then one day you find that 10 years have got behind you. If you're hung up on a gaslighter, evaluate whether trying to make that person behave differently is really a good use of your time. You don't want to wake up one day and find that 10 years have been frittered away on trying to get that person to change. Don't waste time. It waits for no one. You have to do what you can to move on. And start right now.